to Crime in Court. This is my series, Executed Justice for Justin Root, and today we're going to talk about independent investigations and why they're important and how it would benefit this case in particular. Why, we've talked a lot about how independent investigations, how an independent investigation would help this case, but let's talk a little bit more about them. Let us get started here. Why an independent investigation is needed. So, the Root family has been demanding an independent investigation since very shortly after this happened, this incident. As we know, Justin Root was executed basically in broad daylight in front of multiple civilians. And there's a lot of conflicting evidence. There's bias. There's all sorts of problems with this case. So the family has been demanding an independent investigation since shortly after the incident took place, which was February 7th, 2020, where Justin Root was killed by 6 law enforcement officers, 5 Boston PD, and 1 Massachusetts State Police officer. So within 30 days, Michael Morrissey, who, as we know from the Karen Reed case, is the DA in Norfolk County, and he exonerated all 6 of those officers very shortly. Is found no evidence of, use of excessive force, no criminal conduct or misconduct of any kind. Just, all of our officers are perfect and on the up and up, even though we found tons of errors that they committed that day, but whatever. It's fine. They're perfect officers and we're not gonna discipline them in any way. So critical evidence and important witness statements were left out of the DA's final report. We know that the EMT, that was Shelley McCarthy, she was at Justin Root's side, said that she saw him just seconds before he was shot. His eyes were rolling back in the back of his head. He was unconscious. He was lights out, nobody home. Those were her words. She said that he was not reaching for a firearm by his side. One hand was on his chest, the other hand was at his side. And those statements were completely discounted in this case for some reason. Boston police ordered that the former EMT get away from Justin's side. Basically, they came in, guns raised, kind of yelling at her to get away. I don't know if they had guns pointed at her when they did that, but they had their guns ready to fire within seconds. So I'm almost thinking that they commanded her to get away at gunpoint, screaming at her to leave his side when he clearly needed some medical assistance. We do know that significant blood loss was a factor here prior to Justin Root exiting his car. So meaning again that he was incapacitated, covered in blood, he had no weapon in his hand, and all of these factors were not considered in this case. And as we know, it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, and basically they have qualified immunity, so they're covered, they're good. It was all in effort of them, doing their job. And so we're all good. Nothing to see here. So, what is an independent investigation? It is an external review, external being the key phrase. It's an external review of police conduct, such as officer involved shootings that were conducted, or the investigation should be conducted by an impartial agency outside of the involved department or departments. So in this case, we have Boston Police and the MSP. So it should be people totally external and outside of the Boston Police and the Massachusetts State Police doing this investigation. So that's what that means. But as we know, there were two investigations done in this case because there were two locations, two sets of incidents. So one was done in Boston, which is Suffolk County. The other was done in Brookline, a suburb of Boston, which is Norfolk County. So that is why we have two different investigations. Neither of those uh, counties should involve Boston Police or Massachusetts State Police, and they were part of that investigation. So therefore, it's a biased investigation. In Massachusetts, an independent investigation in Massachusetts could involve the Attorney General Andrea Campbell or a special prosecutor to ensure objectivity and avoid conflicts of interest. In this case, we know that there are ties between the Massachusetts State Police and Norfolk DA's office. In fact, they have a state police detectives unit that works right out of the Norfolk County DA's office, Michael Morrissey's office. So there is that connection between Michael Morrissey and MSP. I'm sure that, they have good working relationships with other law enforcement as well. So I'm thinking Boston Police Department and MSP would have, good ties to, at least they would have motivation to cover up for one another if they're, you know, doing something nefarious. So there's that to take account too, because law enforcement likes to cover for law enforcement. So even if Boston Police Department isn't in the Norfolk County office, they still probably have decent ties to one another in that regard. Um, as you can see on the screen, I have a couple pictures here. So, an independent investigation was done in that top picture is images of all of the Central Park Five who did many years in prison for a crime that they did not commit. After, public outcry and support, eventually an independent investigation was done and they were exonerated in this case and they were set free. So, in that case, an independent investigation led to an exoneration of some individuals. We have George Floyd, and next to that is Sandra Birchmore, both of whom independent investigations were done, autopsies, separate autopsies were done to evaluate and determine what took place in the deaths of these two individuals, both different, totally different. I'm not going to get into politics or anything, but both totally different situations. Derek Chauvin was convicted due to an independent investigation, and we also know that Matthew Farwell in the Sandra Birchmore case, which is local, Boston, sorry, that was Canton, but also Norfolk County. So that is another case where an independent investigation was done over the DA's office, above and over the DA's office. It was done and because they didn't do a proper investigation. So they he's not convicted, but he has been charged, Matthew Farwell, in Sandra Birchmore's death. And there was autopsies that, the autopsy was, in this case, Norfolk County determined it was self-unaliving, whereas the autopsy reports prove or show that it is very much more likely that her life was taken that day. So those are some examples of independent investigations that you might be aware of or not. All right, so why are independent investigations important? This is staggering. This is awful. So, according to the ACLU in 2023, they came out with a report that said Only 2% of police shooting investigations lead to charges when self-reviewed. So basically, when you are when the police are self-policing themselves, they only charge themselves 2% of the time when there's misconduct or whatever. There may be, that's pretty bad considering that there's a lot of cases where qualified immunity saves these people, these officers of the law who have committed misconduct or whatever, and that's pretty scary that there's usually never any accountability or repercussions for the things that they do, which are sometimes unlawful or corrupt or whatever. All right, so independent investigations build public trust by preventing bias in internal reviews, like the fact that DA Morrissey is basically having him and his own officers investigate themselves. An independent investigation would ensure accountability for those police actions where, we're only getting 2% of police being charged in misconduct cases when it should probably be a lot more. Um, in this particular case, in the Root case, there was no discipline for Godin. So Officer Godin, he just came right up to Justin, he didn't follow protocol by um, uh, seeking, what's the word I'm looking for? Not shelter, cover, seeking cover in a potentially dangerous situation. He just went straight up to Root and thought that Root was pulling out a gun, so then he started firing, just completely ignoring protocol. Godin didn't even have his own gun that day, if you recall. He had a different officer's gun. Somehow their keys opened different lockboxes, and somehow it got messed up, and they had the opposite guns that day. Don't really know what happened there or why he wasn't disciplined in that. And also, uh, what else did he do? Oh, he lied about his body worn camera. So there's that. No discipline for him on that. Joseph McMenemy, Officer McMenemy, both of these are Boston police officers. McMenemy did an unauthorized pit maneuver leading to Root speeding up, causing a high speed chase, causing Justin to hit multiple vehicles, for his vehicle to be incapacitated, lose wheels. Um, I'm sure Justin sustained more injuries during those crashes because it was multiple crashes. And then he staggered out of his car at that point and fell to the ground, got up and fell to the ground again. And then that's when the EMT rushed to his side. So, no discipline or training or anything was done after all of that has been revealed. Why? I don't know. Um, because they cover it for themselves. So, another thing that an independent investigation would do is provide thorough and transparent analysis of the evidence. Independent investigations are meant to be transparent, whereas the DA's investigations of themselves are not. So, this would lead to much more fair outcomes, potential reform in the laws or enforcement of those policies to the law enforcement when you lie about wearing your body worn camera and taking it off and it's caught on camera, maybe there should be some enforcement on those policies and some discipline there, but that wasn't done in this case. And also training, better policy enforcement, like I said. So why this never happened in this case is beyond me. But this case in particular calls for it specific. I mean, this is a really good example of where we need an investigation. Um, when are independent investigations necessary? I would say when there are doubts that have been raised about impartiality, especially like when the DA's office is investigating their own officers. High profile cases, this has become a high profile case, much more so than it would have been before, because we've got the Birchmore case, the Karen Reed case, and all these other cases that are starting to come out now with Michael Morrissey. Um, Another reason why an independent investigation might be necessary is when you have conflicting evidence or public outcry. So in the Birchmore case, you had the conflicting autopsy reports. So the medical examiner for the Norfolk County says, "Oh, it was just, self-unaliving, no big whoop." But then you've got independent autopsies from renowned medical examiners in the industry and are coming out and saying, "No, that's not true. Her hyoid bone was broken," which is a sign of struggle and that someone did that to her. So that's a prime case of when you have conflicting evidence and an independent investigation is needed, for example. Another reason why they would be essential is in police shooting cases because they don't, you don't want them investigating themselves. And especially in mental health crises like this with Justin Root, where you had officers just not responding in the proper way. And then also when you have disputed facts about law enforcement, what they're saying versus what the evidence is showing or what other eyewitnesses are saying, and that's what we have in this case as well. All right, so the benefits of an independent investigation in the Root case. Um, we have, well, the Root case involves disputed evidence. So the BB guns, condition, officer testimony, an independent probe would re-examine all of these things. So Godin's statements about his body-worn camera, why was that never investigated properly? So they interviewed him once. He lied about wearing, he said he wasn't wearing a body-worn camera. Months later, uh, body worn camera from another officer comes out and shows that he actually was wearing a body worn camera. He walked to his car, he took it off, and then walked back, and you can see that he's not wearing it anymore on his uniform. And why was that not investigated more? Like, why he was then interviewed a second time. He said to his recollection, he didn't remember wearing it and he didn't remember taking it off. Okay, so we just leave it at that. Boston Police Department didn't do anything more to get to the bottom of that, or this investigation didn't do anything more to get to the bottom of that. It's very concerning that they're just like, "Oh, okay, he just didn't remember." So we're just going to go with that. Another conflicting thing that we have in this case is Officer Figueroa in her recorded interview doesn't remember. She remembers seeing the BB gun, but she doesn't remember how, when, where, at what point in time. She just remembers seeing it at the scene, and she was so traumatized and she just can't remember, but she remembers seeing it. She can't identify when, where, how. An MSP trooper Keneally gets his statements in on his recordings and says that he actually had Figueroa retrieve it from Root's hand. How does she not remember that? How does she not remember taking it from Root's hand and giving it over to Trooper Keneally, which is what he says she did? So we've got conflicting statements between the officers and how that gun was retrieved. Then you also have the condition of the BB gun, which they say, the condition was it was clean, basically. As you can see in the image, it's clean, it's um, not shattered, but Justin had injuries to his palm of his hand, which I think took place at the first incident in Boston, where he was holding the clear plastic BB gun on camera. You can see that it's a clear plastic BB gun. It's not or a clear plastic paintball gun, sorry. It's not this BB gun that they're trying to say that they took out of his hand at the scene in Brookline. So conflicting stories again, and the condition of the BB gun was pristine. An independent investigation could uncover overlooked details such as the EMT Shelley McCarthy's testimony about Root's incapacitation, potentially revealing misconduct. So, why were the officers like they just came rushing in and didn't try to get any kind of statement from McCarthy? They just came in and started shooting Root. If they had talked to McCarthy, maybe they would have learned that Root was incapacitated, but they didn't. And that's actually one of the reasons that the courts said McCarthy's testimony should be discredited is because she didn't tell them right away. Well, she didn't have an opportunity to because she was basically forced off and then they just shot Root. So it's do you see how the arguments don't even make sense sometimes? And if they had talked to McCarthy or if they had assessed the situation better, they would know that they failed to render medical aid to someone who was desperately in need of it. And they wouldn't have needed to use any force, let alone excessive force, because he was incapacitated. An independent investigation could also address the family's concerns about tainted officer statements, which we know are problematic. The DA's reports, which leave out a lot of information that wouldn't be beneficial for the officers. And it would also offer a fresh look at the case if an independent investigation were to occur. Total fresh eyes, new people looking at it that aren't related to, Michael Morrissey and the Boston police. New evidence could potentially be uncovered, prompting a new civil suit because, as you know, the Root family civil suit has been basically exhausted by the Supreme Court. So they would need new evidence to be uncovered or something extraordinary to have a new suit filed, and that is what an independent investigation could do. Or something could be revealed so bad that would, tarnish the city of Boston, although at this point, I don't think they really care about their reputation, but it could tarnish their reputation so bad that they might just settle, or it might just be so egregious that they're like, yeah, we'll just settle with the Root family because we don't want all this. We don't want to deal with all this. Although I don't see that to be likely because they never want to admit that they're wrong. It could also lead to new criminal charges to the officers involved. As we know, there were no criminal charges. The DA's office said we didn't find anything criminal that they did. They also didn't find anything that should lead to disciplinary action, which, as we know in this case, there were several errors by multiple officers. So there should be disciplinary action. Definitely training should be involved and possibly decertification of some of these officers. I think if you lie under sworn testimony, you should be decertified. So Godin should be gone. Um, Figueroa is, I almost say that way too, because she doesn't remember seeing the BB gun. So and she's in a stressful situation and she can't use her trauma or PTSD or whatever she wants to say because it was a stressful situation. She's an officer of the law who has to deal with stressful situations, so she should remember details like, oh yeah, I grabbed the gun out of his hand, but she didn't. So I think she should be decertified too. Other things that could come from an independent investigation would be policy changes in dealing with mental health calls, which is, as we can see in this case, vital, very, very necessary and needed in um, police office or in law enforcement. And this could be something that they could use to honor Root's memory by, enforcing policy changes for mental health crisis and preventing future tragedies, which would be something that could be good that could come from this. Could be a positive outcome from all of this horrific thing, all of the horrific stuff that has happened in this case. So, how do independent investigations work? They involve gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, so evidence that might not have been gathered in the first place, or re interviewing witnesses that may have lied in the past, like the officers. Analyzing reports by an external team. Remember that word external is key, often for criminal and administrative duties. So when you have an independent investigation, you're looking at the investigation from both a criminal aspect and an administrative aspect. Are there criminal charges that could um, occur to these officers? If so, you proceed with that. But then there could also be administrative duties or administrative actions that could take place for these officers. Maybe it's not criminal, but maybe it's, they become decertified or whatever it is. So they're, or at least get some kind of punishment for what they're doing or what they did in this case. In Massachusetts specifically, this may include a multi-task force agency or multi-agency task force. Sorry, I can't speak. I'm dyslexic sometimes. So they may include multi-agency task forces with findings reported publicly. So that's the key. You want to be transparent, so you want to publish your findings so that everyone has access to it, and it could lead to reform. In this case, in Massachusetts, the AG's office would handle the independent investigation through their civil rights division. This could also include state or FBI input at certain points during the investigation. So it would mainly be handled by the AG's office, but they would um, initiate help from the state or federal level. Who initiates them? Like I said, the AG's office would likely initiate an independent investigation, often in response to public pressures or DA referrals in a situation where there's a conflicted case. Like, say, Michael Morrissey could have been like, oh, you know what? We're conflicted in this case because this is our MSP officer. So, you know what? Let's have the AG's office, he could have requested from the AG's office an independent investigation, but he didn't. Um, you can also start one by via legislative mandates or court orders when bias is suspected. So, is it possible that maybe if the AG doesn't initiate, that a court could initiate it if you get a court order to go with it? But I don't, that might be a stretch in this case in particular. But in other cases, you might be able to get a court order for an independent investigation. In this case, because they've exhausted all of their appeals efforts and everything, I don't think that's likely, but it is a possibility. So just FYI. How do you get one started? Especially if you're the Root family, you would start by filing formal requests with the AG's office, supported by petitions, media campaigns, so they can file formal requests with the AG, supported by petitions, media campaigns, or even evidence of bias. Um, Getting those things together and whatnot is probably difficult and a arduous task, I would assume, especially to get the attention of the Attorney General. Um, Petitions, keep that in mind because at the end of this, I will ask you to sign a petition for an independent investigation. Um, Another way in which, or another thing involved in getting one started, an independent investigation started, would be gathering public support. And that is where you guys come in, which would be to help support the Root family by signing the petition. So they gather public support. She's out there, that's Jen Root out there, garnering support from the public, trying to get more eyes on this case and attention as needed. She's spoken out in media, done news interviews and things like that. She's um, been out there trying to get that public support. Another way is submitting documentation, advocating through rallies or legal filings for an official review. They've done all these things. Like they've exhausted the legal filings. She's been out there doing rallies, advocating for this. So they're doing what they need to be doing. They need your help as well. So who would be assigned to the DA's investigation? It would be assigned to independent entities like the Massachusetts Attorney General's office or a special prosecutor unaffiliated with the local police. Could involve, like I said, multi-agency teams, including external experts. So they might bring in external experts on police misconduct or excessive force, use of excessive force, things like that, to ensure neutrality and a comprehensive analysis. So they might bring in people to evaluate to evaluate the officer's behavior in this case. How might the results be different? Results could differ by identifying biases in the original DA's report, which we know exist, potentially leading to charges, discipline, training, and or policy changes. An independent review might validate civilian testimonies like Shelley McCarthy's fostering trust and delivering justice that was denied in prior investigations. So, like in this case, they just completely threw out McCarthy's eyewitness statements about him being incapacitated and having his eyes roll back in the back of his head, even though she's an EMT. Like, she's kind of an expert in what she's talking about. She's not just any old civilian, but they just discounted her. And they took the weight of the officer's words and gave that much more weight than the civilian witnesses in this case. And in this case, I think, being an EMT, she's a little bit more than a civilian in that I would trust what she's talking about in medical aid when it comes to that. So, in this case, like I said, the word of the officers was basically believed over civilian eyewitnesses, and you can't have that. So an independent review can give equal weight or better, give a more fair weight to everybody's statements. So, like I said, please go to justinroot.com and sign the petition in support of an independent investigation into Root's death. I will leave a link to that petition in the description below. So please make sure that you do that. And I thank you guys so much for watching. Please go right to that petition right now because otherwise you'll forget. So go straight there and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. Bye now.